Welcome into another episode of the Digital Dispatch Podcast. My name is Blythe Brumleve, and I got a special one for you today. Back before COVID threw a wrench in the live events world, my boyfriend, Badr Milligan, a fellow podcaster over at the Shortbox, along with myself, would throw quarterly meetups for all of the podcasters in the North Florida area. We had been doing these meetups for a couple of years and had our last one in February of 2020, right before the world closed down. So since then, obviously, we haven't been able to have those in-person meetups, and we weren't sure when or how to start them back up. Until this week, when we held our first virtual meetup, and it was surprisingly a big success. I say surprisingly because we figured most people have Zoom fatigue, and we didn't want to add to that, especially because being creative and making content during a stressful time is pretty difficult. But I can tell you how nice it was to chat with some familiar faces again, meet some new ones, and even have folks from outside the North Florida area join in. Safe to say this got the creative juices flowing, so I'm happy to share with you that discussion on sort of the state of podcasting with panelists Alban, Brooke, head of marketing over at Buzzsprout, Gary Spurgeon, owner at Studio Podcast Suites, and then finally, Badr actually interviews me to talk about my new show, Cyberly. So I hope you guys enjoy this chat, and we can't wait to bring you some more of this insight. Take a listen. All right. 7:30. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And you know, like I said, our first guest won't be joining us until about 7:40, 7:45. That'll be Alban. Brooke, if you guys have ever been to any of our previous meetups, then you're probably familiar with Alban. We've had we're getting a lot more folks to join and a lot more familiar faces too, man. I'm glad to see the Jacksonville Podcasters Unite group in the house. Oh, it was a pleasure. But like I was saying, our first guest will be joining us around 7:40 to 7:45. His name is Alban Brooke. He'll be talking about podcasting trends. If you guys don't know him, he is the head of marketing at Buzzsprout, which is a major podcast platform company. Speak of the devil, there goes Alban right there. Like I said, we're still going to just be kind of doing introductions and letting folks join. I wanted to go ahead and introduce myself and my colleague and co-founder, Blythe Brumleve. My name is Badr Milligan, one of the co-founders of the Jacksonville Podcasters Unite group. I also host the Shortbox Podcast. Been podcasting for about 2012. Blythe, you want to give a quick little intro?
Sure. So I've been a podcaster for, since 2014. So I can't really do math right now. But former blogger turned podcaster turned sometimes TV person. Just recently got a new show on the FreightWaves platform. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And I run a digital marketing agency for logistics and supply chain companies and based out of Jacksonville, Florida. And we're actually recording this show about 10 feet away from each other. So Badr is actually across the hallway. He was trying to give me some really bad lighting in his office, so I switched to mine.
Yeah, she's got the superior lighting now. And I see a few names that maybe I'm not quite familiar with at the moment. I see a lot of familiar faces that have been to some of our previous meetups. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Jacksonville Podcasters Unite group was started in 2012. I'm sorry, not 2012. That'd be crazy. 2018. I apologize. It's a group of North Florida-based podcasters. We used to meet back when the world was fully open. We used to meet around town every quarter to discuss podcasting topics, pain points, share new ideas, and really just have a chance to collaborate amongst other podcasters here in our hometown. Welcome, Gary. Like I said, the Jax Podcasters Unite group, it's an open group. We don't care if you are a seasoned professional or, just getting started with podcasting. It is a group that, we welcome everyone to join and partake in it. We are hoping to get back to regular kind of quarterly meetups. We'll see how this one goes. Maybe we'll do another virtual one or a in-person one. But like I said, it's just an opportunity for all of us podcasters here in the North Florida to kind of collaborate on a quarterly basis. We have a Facebook group page that we kind of share information. Everyone can kind of ask questions, post their latest episodes. I'll go ahead and throw a link in that in the chat here in a few seconds. But Yeah, man. Like I said, today we got a panel of very knowledgeable and seasoned professionals who are looking, we're looking forward to talking about the state of podcasting, as well as sharing some other helpful resources of you guys to help you improve your podcast if you've been doing it for a while, or to kind of help you grow your. There we go. So we got the Facebook group page in the chat. If you want to go ahead and join that group, that'd be fantastic. Blythe, what am I missing? Am I missing anything?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, but sort of the goal with a lot of these meetups and what we've done in the past is that we want to provide that collaboration over competition. And so really being that resource to each other, and Buzzsprout and Alban and the guys over there have been really, really helpful with not only a lot of the content that they provide, but also with previous meetups happening there. I think we had close to 80 people at the last meetup, which in Jacksonville, Florida, like it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, like I said, the first meetup we had was back in April 2018, and I don't know what our expectations were at the time of who would show up. It was like, I don't know what other podcasters here in town, but let's go for it. And it was, I mean, from the first event and every event afterwards, it was always such a welcoming and impressive moment to see the city turn out. Especially for such a maybe not so much a niche hobby now, but for such a niche thing of podcasting, it's always been very impressive to see the turnout and things like that. So we are looking forward to getting back to our quarterly meetups and such. And like I said, I see a lot of new faces, new names joining us. If you want to go ahead at any point, maybe feel free to say hello or drop your podcast in the chat. That'd be fantastic as well. Like I said, the link to the Facebook group page, the Jax Podcasters Unite Facebook group page, is in the chat as well. Feel free to join that. It's open invitation for anyone that's a local podcaster.
We've got Alban, Brooke. He's in the chat too. He's the head of marketing over at Buzzsprout. And I just saw him on a Twitter Spaces live. And so he's that much into podcasting that he goes from one audio platform, technically, I guess, now to another platform to talk about podcasting. So we'll actually maybe get the conversation rolling with him sooner rather than later. But just a really great resource. Even if you host with any other company besides Buzzsprout, then you can always check out their articles and their content because it's a ton of just helpful information.
For sure. And I see Gary, who is also going to be our second speaker for the evening. It looks like he's recording out of his spot at Studio Suite Podcast. And Blythe, you recently recorded there as well, correct?
Yes. I had actually a really important guest that I reached out to do an interview, and it was supposed to be remote, and he by chance was coming to Jacksonville in the next couple of weeks. And so I knew I couldn't really record out of my office space. This is really built for one person. So I didn't want to say, hey, why don't you come by my house and I can set up a chair in my office. So I knew I had to come up with something, really impressive. This is a guest that I did want to impress. And I went to Gary's website. I didn't even reach out to him first. I actually went to his website first, and there was the ability to book online. It took less than 10 minutes, and I already had an appointment, and I could pick the day, I could pick the time. So it was really, really fantastic. And he's actually just upgraded his studio space. Now he's, instead of one office, he has two spaces that can be rented. So highly, highly recommend. He's not paying me to say that, but I just based off of personal experience, it really wowed the guest. And he's from Atlanta. And so he ended up reaching out to Gary, I think, in order to try to set up something similar up in Atlanta because it was so well received by him.
Absolutely. And I apologize. It's Studio Podcast Suites. Gary has provided a link to his site in case you're interested in maybe booking some of his podcast services. So check out the chat. And I had it looked like there was a question about can folks from non-Jacksonville areas join? Absolutely. If you know a fellow podcaster or an aspiring one, regardless of where they're at, that's the power of virtual meetups, right? Anyone can join. Feel free to share the Zoom link. Much everyone's going to be on mute, so we don't got to worry about too much. And I do want, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to Jason Payne, who I believe is host of the Cup to Cup show. This is what I love about these meetups is that you meet like other podcasts that you might be following within town, but you've never like met the person's face, and you're like, oh, okay, you host that podcast that I follow on Instagram or social or listen to. So I heard
pretty well. It's definitely a lot of new faces, which is really, really cool to see. And then a lot of familiar faces. This is something that, we've been really passionate about over the last few years. So being able to see you guys again and converse with you again is something that we were both really pumped about. So it's cool to see like so many of you to show up and show that, podcasting is still strong in the North Florida area, where a lot of creators probably over the last year have, it's probably been I know it's been a challenge for me to produce content, and I'm finally starting to hit that groove again. But especially during the height, of last summer and even into the fall, it was very difficult to create new content. So seeing you guys out there still creating, it's really cool to see.
Absolutely. And speaking about like kind of being able to collaborate and hear from folks, like I said, most of you are on mute joining. That's just a kind of, most of you guys are on mute joining us. What we will offer is at the end, like I said, we've got 3 panelists at the end of their segment. We'll give you guys a chance to either ask them questions directly. So if you feel like, hey, I want to ask a question directly, feel free to let us know in the chat. Or if you just got a question that you want us to ask on your behalf and you don't really want to go off mute, that's fine too. Just let us know. So we'll just utilize and be monitoring the chat as we go through the panel today. So any questions you got, any comments, feel free to chime in. We absolutely encourage that.
Likewise. So I think maybe do you want to get into let's get into the first interview?
Absolutely. It's about enough, 7:40 is about 10 minutes in. I think this is good. And like I said, everyone joining will be on mute, so we don't have to worry about any interruptions or whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and get Alban off of mute, and then I'll give him his introduction.
Awesome. Well, in the meantime, if you guys miss any portion of the show, we're recording right now. So we'll have this up posted hopefully by the end of this week. We'll have each of these guest interviews and we'll post them to the Facebook group. So if you're not already part of that, be sure to join that. And then in addition, maybe we can send a link out to the direct audio or the direct video to everybody who registered. Even if you don't use Facebook, I don't typically use it a lot. So we'll do both of those options just so that everybody gets a copy of it.
The Jax Podcasters Unite, not to sound like a shameless plug, but it's the only reason I still have a Facebook. So. But let's go ahead and get into our first guest speaker of the day. He's no stranger to some of you, like we said. His insights into podcasting and the industry at large has been integral in some of our previous meetups. He's the head of marketing at Buzzsprout, the all-in-one podcast hosting platform, and he's joining us today to talk about the latest trends in podcasting. Let's go ahead and welcome Alban Brooke to the panel. Hey, Alban.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me, Badr.
Yeah, absolutely. We couldn't. Yeah, come on. You are a staple in our meetups and whatnot. And as Blythe was saying, you've already got a good warm up talking about podcasting and trends. We saw you on Twitter. It looked like having a discussion about it.
I was literally just warming my voice up for this. I came upstairs. I can't sit there and know that I'm going to talk in 30 minutes and be like, got to be there right at 7:30. So I was like, I should just do something for 30 minutes. And I was like, all right, I'll pull up in this Twitter space. And then the guy who runs Pod News, James Cridlin, jumped in, and then a bunch of people just started showing up and wanting to chat about podcasting. So just warming up my voice.
Nice. Which is a great newsletter, by the way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Alban, like we were saying, it looks like we got a lot of new faces joining us as well as some familiar ones. I'd like to go ahead and get you kind of acquainted with everyone new that's joining us. Do you want to tell us briefly how you got into podcasting?
I mean, yeah, sure. So, I probably started listening to podcasts like 2006 or so, and lived overseas for a little while where I didn't have almost any internet. And when I did that, I was kind of keeping in touch with everything by listening to podcasts. And so had kind of a long relationship with it, ended up becoming a lawyer and hating it, and realized at some point there was an opening at a podcast company in Jacksonville, Florida called Buzzsprout, and made the jump. And it's been a medium I've always been excited about. And now I've been at Buzzsprout for 6.5 years as the head of marketing. And it's been just like a absolute pleasure to see this industry grow, see more people get involved, see a ton of big companies get interested in this space, and kind of just be along for the ride.
Oh yeah. One interesting story. Interesting career switch. From lawyer to podcaster. Living the dream.
It has to be much more exciting than I mean, but I imagine it also helps with the role of marketing too. I mean, I heard you on the recent Buzzcast episode where you were talking about reading through Apple's new terms of service with all of the news that they've dropped over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was just a switch from a job that wanted all my time and in return would give me like good money, but it was like work that I hated. And it was very nice to burn out like pretty quickly. I only practiced law for a year and a half and I was like, wow, this is exactly not what I want to do. And I don't want to become one of these people who, I don't know, like it's very easy. I think lawyers often get kind of like handcuffed to the job because they get addicted to the money. And I was like, well, before I get addicted to this money, I better get out of here. And so Trip made the switch early and yeah, I couldn't be happier.
We're glad you made the switch, Alban. And so Alban, within the last year, podcasters, have had to adjust to the changes brought upon by the pandemic, as well as the shift to working remote, as well as the rising popularity of virtual meetup platforms like Zoom. So based on the information that Buzzsprout has been monitoring this past year, what are give us like 3 significant changes or trends that you've noticed in podcasting, whether they be general or maybe general among the podcasting space or specifically among the podcast by Buzzsprout. You notice any significant trends?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's been a massive amount of changes in the last year. I mean, the first was right when we started hitting all the shutdowns, changes in people's listening behaviors changed completely. If you've been running a podcast for over a year, I'm sure you saw like really tough hits to your numbers when people went into lockdown. It's just because everyone's behaviors changed, their habits changed. I used to drive 45 minutes into work every day. And so I had all my shows. Like I had shows I listened to every Monday morning. I had a show that came out Wednesday while I was at work. So I'd listen to it on the way home. And like I had this habit. And then when I wasn't driving, I'd look at my phone and be like, wow, I've got like 12, 15 episodes that have piled up. Normally I've got almost none just because my habits changed. And we still had to take a few months for that to start going back, for the numbers to start rising. And a lot of podcasters getting back to where they were before and now have continued to grow, just as people have figured out different spaces in their life to listen to podcasts. So that's maybe the first trend. The second was, the industry almost doubled last year. So many people realized the value of just like your human voice and being able to listen to people, especially when, we were dealing with all this COVID stuff. It was really nice to be able to just kind of give your thoughts and talk over a mic, maybe have some conversations, and for people who wanted to listen, just to like tune in and, be able to kind of feel like still that connection. And like, I totally understand that because there's a long time where, I'm living overseas and I'm going, man, it's so nice to be able to listen to these podcasts because no one around me speaks English. So it's really nice to be able to, listen to this and, feel connection to home. Few of the other things some of the trends I've seen is, Clubhouse, obviously everyone knows, has really taken off, especially since maybe like November of last year. It's kind of cooled a bit last few months, but I've seen a lot of podcasts start doing these cool hybrid shows where maybe they have a podcast and they put it out there and they kept the podcast thing going exactly the way it was, but maybe they do these after show times where they hop over to Clubhouse and like, hey, what do you guys think of this episode? I just interviewed this person. What do you think of the interview? What could I have improved? What would you have asked them? And kind of fostering this two-way communication with their audience. A lot of times on podcasting, it's one way and we hope other people are listening on the other end. We see the download numbers, but truth be told, you don't always feel like those numbers are people. It's hard to remember that. And so I've seen a lot of people start Clubhouse rooms, once in a while, or Twitter Spaces where they're connecting to their audience. So that's a few of the trends. The other one I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute is this huge one, which is we just attracted every big tech company in the world to podcasting. It's like we've all been here doing this stuff for, a bunch of people in this room for 10 years. And all of a sudden Facebook was like, oh, what's that podcasting thing? Yeah, we want that too. And so everybody's been getting into the game the last year.
Well, speaking of which, not only Facebook has dropped some new podcasting news, but Spotify and Apple have essentially changed the entire game of their service offerings over the last couple of weeks. What do you
Yeah.
think are the biggest moments from each of those three big players, and how can podcasters sort of adapt to thrive?
Okay, so maybe can I give a quick recap of like what each
Please.
three said? All right. Facebook, I'm confident, just heard that Apple Podcast subscriptions was coming out. Spotify was going to announce their stuff. And Mark Zuckerberg went down to like the lab and was like, hey, you guys better come up with like 4 announcements tomorrow. Like the stuff they came out with, it's not like, hey, this thing's done. It's like, hey, we're going to clone everybody in the face, just like we did with Snapchat, just like we did with TikTok, all these different things we copy. We're going to copy Anchor. We're going to copy Clubhouse. We're going to copy, there's an app called Auphonic, which is just cleaning up audio. And we're going to copy Headliner, making those audiograms. And they're like, we're going to do all of that stuff. But then they didn't have really a whole lot to us. So my feeling is they saw that $4 billion valuation that Clubhouse got. And they wanted to make sure when all of these all of these articles are about to be written, that they were included in the story. So I've got a lot of thought on what Facebook announced and where they could go. I'm still, you guys remember a year ago, they were launching a new digital currency for the entire internet called Libra. And like, no one knows where that went. That just disappeared. So we could see Facebook do some of that again. Then we go over to Apple Podcast, because that's like the most real. I mean, that's the one that affects all of us the most. And I think if there's anyone in this room that's really considering any of these options, that one's going to end up being probably the biggest. So they launched iOS 14.5, totally new Apple Podcast app. Big thing in the app is now when you don't subscribe to show, you listen, or you follow the show. And it helps people differentiate, like follow is free and you just get free, free podcasts. But subscribe is now actually the ability to subscribe inside the Apple Podcast app to a paid podcast. And this has always been out there, like Patreon. A lot of people use Patreon or something called Supercast or Glow.fm, Memberful. There's lots of ways to do this. But what Apple is going to offer us, and why I think they'll probably be pretty good at it, is this totally integrated system. Like, boom, I pull it up, and I never thought I would ever subscribe to Luminary, which had its own private podcasts. So you had to pay for a subscription to it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of goofy. But then when I was watching the Apple Podcast thing, and they were like, oh, there's this show that it's a podcast by Dave Chappelle. I was like, actually, I'd be into that. And, listen to a free episode, pay $2 a month or something to get this podcast. Yeah, I might actually do that. And so you could totally see that you hit this button and boom, now I'm paying for it and getting those downloaded automatically. That's really exciting.
And so,
and then over on Spotify, go ahead.
No, go ahead, because Spotify is doing something that I feel like they sort of pioneered the word follow. And now with Apple following suit, it sort of makes a lot of sense that both of those options would be using a free model. And then recently Spotify also is coming out with a paid model, right?
Yeah, so Spotify now has announced, hey, we're going to do subscriptions. They're going to be limited because they don't actually have phones. And like, remember Android and Apple, like they actually require you to give them a cut of all the money. So if Spotify were to sell subscriptions, they'd have to actually be paying Apple some of that. So Spotify, I think in an effort to get around that, is like, really, I feel like what happened is Spotify is not the one launching it. It's really Anchor is launching it. It's like, if you have an Anchor podcast and you want to sell stuff, you can do it on your Anchor page. And then inside of Spotify, people could listen to it there. Okay, well, what if they want to subscribe? Yeah, you got to go out of Spotify over to Anchor to subscribe and go back in. And so Spotify, just by nature of their relationship with Apple and Android, they're not going to be able to have this seamless, like, I just click something and Face ID, boom, I'm paying for it. You're going to still have kind of this elongated process of like going out to the Anchor page, finding it, subscribing, putting in credit card info and all of that.
And it also feels like it's almost like a new podcast wars sort of brewing between all of these different companies. Is this something that and we actually had a really good question in the chat about sort of the RSS programming that's going to be involved with this. Is this something that we're going to have to set up theoretically a new RSS feed in order to accommodate these new platforms? Or is this something that's already kind of built in to our most of the current infrastructure?
Yeah. So for most people in the room, I think that these are all cool announcements because what they signal is a growing appreciation for the craft that all of you have been working on. And people are starting to take notice that, hey, this actually has value. And more people are showing up to the party, and a lot of those people are rich and they're bringing a lot of money. But like, is Apple Podcast going to be the way for you to monetize your show? Well, probably not, unless you have 1,000 engaged listeners, like people who are listening to every episode and really enjoying it and are, actively asking for more content. Similar to like Patreon, it requires a certain threshold of people before you start getting real money from the podcast. So for a lot of us, I think 90% of podcasters, you're not going to have to change a whole lot. They're all going to do it slightly different. It seems like if you do the Spotify podcasts and you run through Anchor, I think you're just going to upload to them and say, hey, that's a paid episode. And then you're good to go. I think if you do it through Apple, you would still be able to use Buzzsprout. And then the feed that Buzzsprout gives you, you plug that into Apple. And then if you want to have like paid episodes, you would actually go to Apple and say, and give them an episode. Apple's going to do this whole thing where they're going to put DRM around the episode so nobody else can play it. And so they want really, specific file types. They're going to want other stuff. The downside of this for indie podcasters, obviously, is like, we're the ones doing all the work, creating all the content. We're looking for monetization options. The NPRs of the world, man, they can just go around and upload it everywhere and it's no big deal. But for us, like, this is a real amount of work if you're a solo person doing it, because you love a hobby and you do it on the weekends.
Agreed. And I want to insert some questions that are applicable to this topic from the chat. We got two that I think would be good to add here. One from Kenny Embry. He wrote, do you think Apple will actually begin developing these things for Android?
So part of what was in the Apple Podcasts in the license that you agree to when you get into Apple Podcast Connect now says if you put out a show that's a paid podcast subscription, well, you give them a license to play it on everything. Like it can be played in iTunes, on a computer, it can be played here, there, and it does say on Android and Windows devices. And we have seen Apple start to get more comfortable with their software being placed on other products. Like Apple TV now is on a lot of like just random TVs. Now you can actually get Apple TV on there. You can get Apple Music on Android phones, and you can get Spotify listening on your HomePod. So like all of that seems to be Apple, and they can get a little bit more service revenue, like that recurring revenue. Then they're okay letting their software get off of iPhones. So do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. Could it happen? I could definitely see it happening because it makes sense for them. I mean, imagine I'm a podcaster. Let's say I have a big show and I want to put my podcast out for everybody. People are like, hey, I'm an Android. I can't get the bonus content. What am I going to tell them? Like, switch to an iPhone? Like, go buy a new phone so you can listen to my podcast? Like, that's not happening. But if I could say, hey, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but if you can download Apple Podcasts on Android, then you can listen to my show. Now it starts making sense. And Android and Windows phones, that's 30% of the podcast listening market is people listening on those phone devices. So it's a pretty substantial number of listeners who might pay you for your show that, you're just, unless they develop those apps, it's totally, it's like out of their reach.
And then thank you for that, Alban. The other question I got applicable to this topic comes from Al P. He wrote, what does this mean for Buzzsprout?
Oh, we're done. I mean, we're no, thanks, Al.
My heart dropped for a minute.
I mean, it's more competition for sure. I mean, there's like this saying, like, in the elephants fight, the grass is the one that loses or something. Like, we got all the big tech giants, and they're going to be going at it. And Buzzsprout is definitely, much smaller than any of these massive tech companies. I'm not too stressed because in the entire market, what podcasting has always been built around is this open architecture, the RSS. Everything's built on the back of RSS feed so that everything you played at any number of apps be uploaded by any number of creators, and it's a decentralized platform. And I think that over the last 5 years, we've really seen over and over again, maybe having everything locked up in platforms is not the best idea. If you were a small business that invested in Facebook 5 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, and now you're boosting your own posts so that you can get your own people who follow your business to actually see it, give me a break. Like, you built that page and now you can't even get your own people to see it. Or you're on YouTube and you built this audience, and yet people who are subscribed to the show don't even get a notification. Like, come on. Like, so what's going to happen? Are we going to be doing all this stuff for Apple Podcasts and Spotify? Like, if they start centralizing it, am I going to be like, oh, I've got 400 subscribers, only 12 of them actually saw the episode, and so that just wasn't deemed a good episode? I like to say I'm totally cool with all these platforms, but the whole goal is I want to get anyone who's interested in my work and my business's work and anything, I want to get them off of platforms and to somewhere that I control, which is your website, your email list, and your podcast. Those are the three where if you put something out and people already subscribe to it, they can get it without any middleman. And so, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I could hear Blythe smiling from this room when you mentioned email, website.
Control the places you own.
You got to get people to where you can connect them. Yes. And everyone wants us to build a whole audience on their platform. And I just saw it today, like a bunch of brands that have, some of them, 1 million followers on Instagram. They can post something to the grid, and what do they get 20,000 people to see it. It's like, that's terrible. Like, you built 1 million, you got 1 million people to follow you, and only 20,000 are seeing this. You got 1 million people listening to your podcast. Imagine like the amount of attention you'd be getting. And that's the other thing that I love about podcasting is we get people's attention for 30, 40 minutes. Where on YouTube, I'm struggling to get 2.5 minutes of attention. It's just a totally different game. And it's going to take a lot for me to be sold on. I'm going to go over to a platform and go all in with you, just with the promise that you'll always be good to me and you'll always connect me to my audience.
Really good stuff. So Alban, with discussing all of these trends and these upcoming changes, what would you say? Because I mean, as you know, the JPU, we try to go ahead and cater to not only the seasoned podcaster, but also the aspiring and new podcaster. What would you say are maybe 3 things every existing podcaster should have in their toolbox in 2021 to ensure continued growth? And what are maybe a few things that every new podcaster should either know or look into or have in their toolbox?
So when I started thinking through this question, I think those are a lot of the same tools should be coming out, because a lot is going to change in the next 6 months. We may get some sort of Facebook offering that may get tons of new people to listen to podcasts. We might see real monetization through Apple Podcast subscriptions. Maybe some cool stuff happens on Spotify. Any number of things could happen. But the one thing that we know is that they need the content that all of you and all of us have been creating for the past, what's it been, 20 years since the RSS spec was adopted for podcasting. And so let's keep producing great content, because at the end of the day, that's what we have, and that's what we will continue to have after some of these platforms lose interest in us. So what can we do to make sure that our content is still doing really well. And that brings me back to community and unique, differentiated content. And so those kind of go hand in hand for me. Like, you need to find a group of people, and it doesn't need to be very big, worldwide out of 7 billion people. Like, there's a few million people that are into this thing. And so whether or not that's like Jacksonville Jaguars, or if it's you interviewing DJs, or whatever your podcast is, like, there may not be a ton of people who are into it, but you've got a core audience that really wants this content, and they will love it. And then create unique, differentiated content for them. A lot of podcasters fall into this trap where they got introduced to podcasting by listening to Joe Rogan, kind of just mouth off for 3 hours with some cool tech CEO or, a scientist or something. Like, he just goes on for 3 hours, and you're like, man, I'd love to do 3-hour conversations with cool people. That's not available to almost any of us. The thing that we can do is find an audience that's a core community that you can connect to, and what they want and what they're into, and then create really great content specifically for them.
I think a lot of new podcasters tend to think that casual conversation makes for good podcasting, and that's usually not always the case.
It can feel a little bit more casual in the moment, but if the more you're rambling, the more you've got to be working on that editing side. So I know Al Pete knows how painful this can be when somebody passes you a big rambling episode. You've got to be the one to edit it down. Putting that work on the front end and being like, hey, let's focus in on these topics. Let's make sure we've all done our research. We understand what we're talking about, and then dive into it. Man, it improves the quality of the content so much, and your audience will appreciate it. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be word for word, everything written out. Stuff can be on the fly and, be organic, and there can be a little banter, but we're trying to create unique, differentiated content that people can't get anywhere else. You can't just allow yourself to be replaced by any number of people who just kind of copy the same.
Well said. And Al wrote, scripts and pre-production are golden to podcasting. I wanted to piggyback off that because one thing I've started incorporating amongst my own show with crew is Google Docs, which I got to give Blythe credit for bringing me up to 2020. Being able to share a document with links, with the topics, certain cue points, if you want to have that, utilize that, has been a game changer as well. It's being able to share the same information that I'm observing with my crew, that way, they're not going off on different tangents or whatnot. We're all kind of on the same page. So I agree with you, Alban. I think, taking that time for the pre-production and getting like your team at least on the same page, like you said, it doesn't have to be hypercritically, scripted and everything. I think some of the magic of podcasting comes from those casual moments,
Yeah. I mean, personally, like when we do Buzzcast, those are mostly a 45-minute episode. That's mostly like a 2.5 hour process to record those, where we already have a kind of an outline, and then the three of us talk through like, hey, here's what we're going to chat about. Here's what I find important. Hey, that's a topic I don't really want to go towards this week. I think that's going to be better next week when there's more information. Okay, what about this? Like, here's how I feel about it. Like, we talk through a lot of it, and then we record. And then those recordings often get shortened down by 25%. And so that's helped me just understand, like, the more that I can put in on the front end to be prepped, the better that editing process will be. But then, like, my last tip that I would give existing podcasters in particular is, like, don't be attracted or scared by this like shiny object syndrome. Like 2014, everybody was like, Periscope is going to crush podcasting. And then Spotify was going to crush podcasting. And then we had Meerkat somewhere in there. And we had Facebook now is going to break podcasting. And Clubhouse is going to break podcasting. And like, everyone wants to tell me something else is going to destroy this ecosystem that everybody has been building for 20 years. and it's not going away. In the same way that blogging's not going away. You know, Facebook's still got a ton of most of our written contents over on Facebook now, but blogging still has a place. And if we can remain open and independent, then we have the options to, if it does work for us, to actually go join one of these platforms, maybe go exclusive. Let's at least make sure we're getting paid for our hard work. You know, I don't fault, Joe Rogan for going exclusive and getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars, but the only reason he got that is because for so long he held out of Spotify and he said he wasn't going to go in until he got paid. And so he was able to get paid. So I think you can't just allow these platforms to take complete advantage of us just by promising us, hey, we'll connect you with more listeners, because then it's always going to be locked behind their paywalls.
Well said. And I want to go ahead and welcome. Do we have anyone that wants to ask any last minute questions to Alban? You can either write it in the chat or just let us know if you want to go off mute for a quick sec.
I had one while we're waiting for those. I had one quick question because I heard, Alban, you guys mentioned on the recent Buzzcast episode about Apple releasing something about engaged users. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that kind of means for podcasters?
Sure. So in Apple Podcasts Connect, where you actually go log into like your Apple dashboard, there's always been some stats. It's really interesting because, for like Buzzsprout, we can only show you how many people downloaded the app, right? Or downloaded the podcast. And Apple Podcasts can tell you, this is how much they actually listen to. Well, now they're going to have this new feature that's a stat that's called engaged listeners. And that is either telling you people who listen to, I think, 40% of the episode or 20 minutes of the episode. So pretty much they download it and they listen to a good portion. And I think that's going to be a really good number for us to track as podcasters, to say, okay, I know 1,000 people download this, but how many of them are really getting into it, or actually playing a significant amount of this episode and are really engaged? Because if you're thinking through, I might start charging people for bonus content. Well, you got to take engaged listeners number into account. So if you see a few hundred engaged listeners, now you're thinking, all right, so maybe 10% of them would pay me, monthly. And now you can start thinking about how much money you can make out of that. So it's going to be a good number. I think once we have seen some of the numbers come out of Apple Podcast subscriptions, we'll have a good feel for what that conversion rate will be from engaged listeners to possible subscribers.
I think that is game changing. As someone who has a show that has, multiple segments, I think it would be nice to be able to see how long certain listeners, are staying around, because, you look at your download number and you're like, okay, was it the topic that we talked about this week that got people in, or is it just that, this is what do we have listeners that always tune in? I think being able to tell, did they stay for the first 20 or first 40 would be integral to being able to decide what topics you bring on, what segments maybe you stay on a little longer. I think that's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah. So if you go into Apple Podcasts now, they'll show you that bit where you can see that drop-off curve. And that's super valuable because there's some podcasts, there is a second segment and you see the first segment gets all of the listens, and then maybe the interview, there's a big drop-off. Sometimes you see it actually goes up because people skipped ahead to something. I've seen certain segments in one of our podcasts that were over 100%, which means not only did everyone listen to it, people were rewinding and listening to that part again. So you can get a lot of information if it's, based on how that chart changes, whether or not people actually like that content, or maybe they just kind of suffer through it. You just learn a lot from it.
That's a good point. Yeah, Alban, I think you might have answered all the questions anyone might have had. Per the usual, you have provided a ton of great lessons and gems for us podcasters. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I wanted to give you a chance to let the people know where they can find more of your posts and your information, as well as Buzzsprout's work.
Sure. So I'm Alban Brooke, just spelled like my name right there on Twitter. And if you follow me, you can message me any questions you have about podcasting or any thoughts you have. I'd love to help, and I'd love to be of service if I can. And then Buzzsprout is buzzsprout.com, where we post multiple videos, blog posts, podcasts every week, trying to make podcasting easier. And if there's ever any content you think we should have created that we haven't, let me know, and we'll get on it.
Absolutely. And I'll go and add, I think a toolkit every podcaster could benefit from having is following Alban on Twitter, because he always posts some pretty interesting podcast related topics. And the Buzzsprout YouTube channel is such a great free resource.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely check it out.
Thank you, Badr.
All right, I'll pass it over to you, Blythe. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for our next guest, if you missed the first part of this sort of panel discussion about the state of podcasting, we talked about Gary, he is the owner of Studio Podcast Suites. He has 40 plus years of broadcasting experience, and with his ownership of the Studio Podcast Suites, they actually just upgraded into a new space. They were recording, or that he was offering rental space for both video and audio for local podcasters. You can rent the space right on his website, but they were doing so well, especially during all of the lockdowns and the pandemic. People are still recording and wanting to get their message out there, that he was able to upgrade to a new space now where he has 2 rental studios. And I believe that they have room for a group discussion. And then also in the other space, it's more for like the 1 or 2 hosts kind of podcast. So Gary, we're going to go ahead and bring you on. And so with that said, Gary, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a breakdown of how you sort of got into the broadcasting game with 40 plus years of experience. I think that you can kind of speak on, your experience as a broadcaster and then moving into the podcasting space. Give us a little breakdown of that.
Thanks a lot, Blythe, and great presentation, Alban, all the statistics. Yeah, my background is in broadcasting. I ran major companies and broadcast facilities all around the United States. So I've ran radio stations for 42 years, actually. So I brought that experience when I, quote unquote, I tell people semi-retired. I was looking for something new and unique, and the radio industry was moving into podcasting. Now they're, with iHeart and all the craziness going on in the industry, everybody's thrown themselves into it now, trying to find ways to monetize. But I got into it trying to think, okay, is there a space where I can, rent a very professional facility for people? They can come in, sit down, get a quality product. I stand on the quality product and, making sure they can deliver a great product. But that's why this thing is kind of grown into something bigger. I become a person people come to help them through the entire process, from how does this thing even work? What is a podcast? And so that's how I got here. And that, as Blythe said, I started with a small studio. Now I've got almost 600 square feet, 2 studios, a 4-person studio. We are doing some crazy things, Facebook Live videos. Podcasts, everything you can imagine under the sun out of this production facility.
And so you mentioned with all of the new people coming in that don't necessarily even know what a podcast is. What are some of those common, I guess, hurdles for newbies that are coming into the game?
I think the biggest thing, and I know most of you have your own little studios because I can see the screens here, and I think the biggest challenge people have is they have no clue how the technical aspect works. Number one is like, where do I get a microphone? It is so overwhelming and so it's over their head. They don't understand the editing aspects of it. I'm a big fan of Buzzsprout. Actually, I recommend almost all my podcasters that start a brand new podcast are up on Buzzsprout. They don't even understand how to get themselves distributed. So from just the basics of what microphone do I buy? What board do I buy? I think when they start talking editing, they get all glossed over, what do I need? And I really focus on, okay, yes, we can have you have great quality, which is important, but I always focus on great content. I've been blessed with some of the biggest announcers in the country that I had the opportunity to work with. And we always talked about how important it is to have great content on the show. Radio is much different than podcasting. we only get 2 minutes, a minute and a half to 2 minutes to talk. And so you got to engage that audience. And the same thing really happens in a podcast. I know the challenges people have with content and the planning and preparation. I offer a podcast planner and a checklist so they can come in and understand that, how to guide them through that process.
That's interesting.
So Gary, I want to take a step back and oh, go ahead. Blythe.
No, I was going to ask about the planner, but I'll save that for later because I'm just selfish because I'm a religious planner user. So right when you said that, my ears perked up.
Well, Gary, I was curious, what are some of the trends that you've noticed in your industry and among your customers? Are you seeing more people start creator-owned podcasts, or are you seeing like maybe an influx or a significant amount of like company-owned and sponsored ones?
That's a great question. It's a combination. What I'm amazed about is, and Blythe brought it at the beginning, when the pandemic hit, like anything else, we took a little setback. But after really April of last year, it just blew up. People wanted to do something because they were stuck in their house in May. And the interest in podcasting, I can tell you today, on this day, April 27th, 2021, is the highest I've ever seen it. I'll be honest with you, this month alone, I've signed more. I have a membership. I've signed more members in the last month than I've done the entire time I've been doing this. The interest, the word is getting out. There is this passion for people who want to do podcasts. So I don't know what Alban, he probably can speak better to this than I can, but how many podcasts are out there? You hear all these different numbers, 800,000, there's 1.3 that Apple talks about all the time, but are they active? But I'm seeing the highest level that I've seen in interest in podcasting. And I have an interesting and dynamic clientele from high-end businesses. Johnson & Johnson comes in here. I have RF Smart, people you wouldn't even maybe not familiar with, big companies coming in doing it. I had the unemployment office come in, do a whole major thing here, to the average guy doing a hip hop show. It's just a wide variety of people.
Is there any sort of with all the guests that are coming in to record the shows, you're kind of that firsthand knowledge of all of these different shows that are coming through. Are there any common denominators that you've seen with some of the more successful shows, even if they're, successful in their niche or successful to big business? Are there any of those common denominators that you can share that insight with us?
Yeah, I think the most common, the ones that I find that are the most successful, or the common denominators, is the consistency. Mm-hmm. I think all of you are regular podcasters. I think, as you know, that the more consistent you are with it and you put things out on a regular basis that your listening audience can get, that's what's important. That's what I'm seeing, the consistency. And I'm telling you, the most successful podcasters are great planners. They really have their skill. If they come in and try to wing it, it just doesn't go anywhere. And I see that more and more. And I say, hey, look, you've got to be prepared. I have people that come in with 20-page scripts. Now, they don't read them, but they have everything they're going to talk about. I've been impressed with some of the planning that goes in, the preparation that goes in there.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I'm one of those people that shows up with 10 pages of a plan for every single show. And I would rather be over prepared than under prepared. What about as far as the host talent? Have you been sort of witness to see the hosts get better as I imagine that they get more reps, or are there any kind of common denominators in the production value, which I mean, if they're recording with you, I assume that the production value is already pretty well.
Yeah, what I try to do is, everybody has their own secret sauce with processing, but the answer to your question is, yeah, what I've noticed is if they come into the game and they're fresh into the game, as they do it, the more podcasts, as you said, the word reps, it's just like anything else. Repetition is the mother of all learning, right? The more they get it, they get better at it. What I get a lot of people asking me, because once they come in, they realize I'm in the broadcast world, and they kind of do some research on me, and they know some of the companies that I've worked with, and they'll say, and I have a guy who is one of the top talent coaches in the United States. He'll offer somebody a free talent evaluation. He'll listen to your podcast, and you better be strong in heart, because he's going to be about as real as it comes. He says, hey man, that sucks, but if you want to get better at it, this is what you need to do. But he's being real. I mean, he's coached people like Tom Joyner. That's the talent level. So, and people have been eating that up. They're saying, look, I want to learn. I want to get better. I want to grow my content. But I've been, like, I think one of the questions you asked me, like some of the people in here, I've had a guy by the name Bill Peterson. Bill has a great podcast, and it was called Inside Pro Football. It was the different podcast on football that you can imagine. Mike Mularkey came and hosted it together. Bill was the NFL commissioner over in Europe for 12 years. They blew me away, but here's what interesting. They did 18 shows, but the problem was they wanted to monetize too fast. And that's one of the problems that I see. They get their hopes up too fast. This is a process, as you all know, and everybody wants money fast. They want fast downloads. It just takes time and consistency, and you'll get there.
Absolutely. I think setting realistic goals for your show is definitely key as well. To your point, I've had a few podcasters, or aspiring ones at least, that come in with the idea that they'll be able to monetize, that this is like I don't know where they got it from, but a hobby or something as a way to get a quick buck. I'm like, you have no idea how to get even $1 in podcast.
Yeah. It's funny you're finding out, Badr, what you're finding out too. Believe it or not, some podcasters are actually walking through the door where they got $2,000-$3,000 from a sponsor to do a podcast, and they have never had to put a piece of content out, and so we're laying in ads right off the bat. It even blows me away. Or they just do sponsorship.
And yeah, Gary, I wanted to speak a little more about things that let's say like a podcaster could improve upon, because I noticed on the Studio Podcast Suite's website, and you kind of spoke about it a little bit, but you write that the biggest problems for most podcasters is terrible sound quality, the lack of editing, and no production value in their podcast. Outside of letting a professional or a service handle that for them, what are some things that your average podcaster can do to ensure that their quality is up to par, whether those be simple audio fixes, tweaks, or maybe just best practices they could be incorporating?
There's so much out on this. I think what I recommend, what I recommend to most of my clients is this. Number one is I like to see them have a really good intro, a produced intro of some sort to grab the attention. I don't want a long intro. I don't want something that's 2 minutes long, but something that's it sounds professional. You get a professional voice. Even if you voice it, it's fine, but it's got to be executed in, I think that leads people into the conversation. That's one of them. You talk production value. I make sure the processing sounds really good, and I recommend that to them as well. Another thing is segmenting your show. If you can figure a way to segment your show so you're going from, this one conversation to another conversation, I believe that helps just keep people through it. I posted something on there, talked about, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. It's a term we use in broadcasting all the time. The biggest thing is to get somebody to listen for a longer time, or time spent listening. And there's a couple of ways: horizontal and vertical selling of your show. And I teach this, and it's a little concept, but it works. Tell your people when you come into the show what your show is going to be about today. And oh, by the way, we have this really great guest. They're going to be coming up today at some time. Sell your show during your show, but also when you wrap your show up. This is one of the biggest failures that I see. They don't talk about their next show that's coming up. Hey, look, in my next show, we're going to have, I'm going to have Larry King on. I'm going to have, Alban Brooks on. You got to come in and listen to this because we're going to be talking about this. Leave them with a teaser of some sort. That's vertical selling of your show, and horizontal selling of your show. It's a must.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've started being more conscious about. Is incorporating like just something short, just a sentence in my scripts for the intros and outros to let them know what we're getting into, so that way they can decide right then and there that they want to stick around or not, as well as maybe a line in the intro about what we previously talked about. If I can work that into the intro, perfect. But I always try for the outro, to thank them for their time. And, if you come back next week, we got this awesome guest coming on, or whatever topic it is. So I'm glad to hear you say that as well.
Yeah. I think one of the questions here is what's a way to get sponsors? That's the $1 million question. If I had the answer, I'd be a millionaire right now. That's the number one question I get in the studio. That is number one. It's like, look, I want sponsors for this thing. Maybe I'll leave that to Alban. What's the best way to get the sponsorships? I don't know. I think you got to curate great content. And from there, you're going to, from there that you got your downloads will come. I have a friend here in Jacksonville, Florida. He has the single largest cruise podcast in the world. He gets 120,000, anywhere between 80 and 120,000 downloads per episode. And at the cost per thousand, you guys can get what he's monetizing at $35 to $50 cost per thousand. he's getting quite a few. And he started it 12 years ago, and he came into his own 3 years ago. So I use him as the antithesis, but it took time. It's a full-time job if you want to get there. But, I want people to have fun when they come in here. I want them to have a wonderful experience. I have the regular podcaster that comes in once a month. I have people coming in here once a week. I have people come twice a week now. So it's just all what you want out of your podcast. Have a goal in mind. Know where you're going with it.
Yeah, definitely. I could not agree more, because the ROI is going to be different for every single podcast. The goal might be sponsorships for one show, but then it could also lead to a job opportunity at, with another company, which is what happened to me. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's more than one ways to skin a cat, I guess you could say. I did have a couple questions. One, what is all in this podcast planner? I anxiously wanted to ask this question earlier, and I jumped the gun a little bit, but I'm curious to know what's in a podcast planner.
Basically in the planner, it's nothing earth shattering. It basically just says, hey, look, if you're going to start podcasting, the first thing you need to do is plan out your first 10 episodes. Know the people that you're going to be having a conversation. First, what type of podcast is it? Interview based? Are you going to be yourself? Is it going to be a team doing it back and forth? What is the target goal? What is your goal? And each week, make sure you have it all laid out, that you have everything. And when I give this to people, and the ones that are serious, they come in, they're completely filled out. And they say, look, I've got my 10 podcasts ready to go. And I say, let's get them in the can. And let's one thing great about Buzzsprout, you can schedule your podcast. Let's put 5 or 6 or 7 of them in there, and let's schedule them every week on the same day, the same time. And it's all about planning and preparation, previous to your show.
I love it.
I can't tell you how much of a stress reliever it's been to even be ahead by one podcast. Being ahead by 2 would be an absolute dream. But I think during the pandemic, floating like 1 or 2 podcasts, and make such a difference as far as not being so stressed out about, getting the show ready in time to release. It also kind of freed me up to start planning and getting those interviews set up for the next ones being ahead. So yeah, I think proper planning once again comes down to being a big asset in this podcasting space. Gary, we had some questions come in for you. This one is from Kenny Embry. He wrote in the chat, could you speak to the division between content creation versus marketing your content?
Yeah, content creation. I think you got to focus on the content, and how you distribute that content. Content creation, once again, the more you can spend time on your content and deliver a great product for your listening audience, and know who that listening audience is. Actually, I ask all my podcasters, develop a profile. Who are you trying to talk to, and get as specific as you possibly can? Is it a male? Is it a female? What's their age? What are they doing? What is their lifestyle? By the way, that's what they do in broadcasting if you're running a specific radio station. But then marketing, how are you marketing it? Are you using your social media? Are you taking snippets of your content and sending it out? Somebody's noticed in one of the feeds, one of the things is really a good idea is, if you have enough content, I'll pull some pieces out of your old content. I saw somebody do that. I mentioned that. I think one of the things you can do a best of show, and finding some of the best snippets of some of your past contents. They can get people engaged in what you're doing. But feed it out on all the social media that you possibly can in small bites, so they can get a sense and a feel who you are. I hope I answered the question.
No, I think you definitely nailed it. And we got one other question coming from Robert. He wants to ask this one directly.
Hey, what's going on, Gary? Good on everybody. Good to see everybody. Thank you all coming out. It's been dope. To everybody. But Gary, I did want to talk with you about one thing. I know you said you noticed a couple of us had studio setups for myself, and I also know Al Pete. We have like actual studio office space, not to kind of take anything out of your hands, but what would be some advice or so you would give us for setting up things such as, like, as you mentioned, studio memberships, things for like monetization for studio space for people who come in to record their own podcasts and things like that are outside of our own like networks or our own hosts that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you have to realize is, first, what's the condition of your space? I had somebody walk in here, said somebody had a podcast studio. This is a true story. The person went to this person's place. It was their house. it was in a bedroom in their house in a neighborhood. Who is going to do that? One thing I try to do is create a safe space. What I mean by a safe space, this is a professional office building that I'm in. It's clean. It's a Class A building. So when people walk in, especially, I want you to tell you that 60% of my podcasters are female. So what equipment are you using? They have to be comfortable with how to manage that equipment. So not only is the physical space got to do, but what I think the most important thing is you've got to help guide them, because what you're going to find out, it's very time consuming, because you have to hold their hand. I do a podcast, what I call consultant tour. They come in, we spend 45 minutes, we take them through the process. And I think that if you look at some of my Google reviews, if you just picked up a phone and called one of my podcasters, he says he helps me through the whole process and helps me as my podcast is going. That's what I want to do. I believe that that's the secret. You know, in my membership, I have a membership. There's different ways of doing it. My membership is a subscription based. You come in, you get a discount. It's a monthly fee. You get a discount on the space from my regular price. You get charged every month for that, and you get a studio session. Each additional time you come in that month, you get a reduction. So it's $68 for the membership, but it's only $50 if you come in any other time. So that's, that helps people. I'm trying to, hey, look, this can get expensive, but it's better than going. And once again, I love the Rodecaster board because that's what I use. I use RE320 microphones. These are not cheap microphones, but they're not going to go out and invest, $1,500 to $2,000. They're just not going to do an equipment. So if you can provide a great experience for them, and you look at it, I like the competition. I think it's good for podcasting.
Yeah, because I know I see a lot of Pete's shows that he streams out through his MPN network. Shout out to you guys over there. Been really putting in work. And like I've been here since January, but I've been trying to still develop my space and trying to kind of get things together. But I do need that kind of like, I don't know, kind of someone who's done it before to talk to and kind of figure out the ins and outs of building this space and like being able to monetize and then bring in the actual podcast like community. Like, hey, if you guys need a place, you can come over here.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, Robert, if you like, come on, connect with me, and I'll invite you over to the studio, walk you through, and I'll help you out.
Hey.
The more the merrier. The more the merrier.
We're kind of laughing about this on the chat right now because Gary, you mentioned something about having like a safe space for women to come and podcast. And Absolutely. I could not agree more, because actually how Badr and I met, he invited me to his studio space at his house. And I was slightly creeped out like the whole time.
Look, I was but a wee podcast lad who had no idea what he was doing, and it was actually my buddy's place. He had a room dedicated to his quote unquote podcast space. I think there was like
a room. I'm not going there.
There was like he had like socks for pop filters and all that. I mean, the quality was
10
trash.
dogs at the house too.
We made it work though.
I think what happens is if they get into it, I got to tell you, I mean, have I lost podcasters? Absolutely. Not to the not doing podcasts anymore, but after they come in, maybe they come in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and they'll ask me, hey, what type of equipment? So I get them introduced to the equipment, and then maybe they're going to start picking it up. I think, I've heard some really bad stuff, man, really bad stuff. And you've probably heard it too. I mean, people recording on their bedroom floor, nothing around them. It sounds like echoing forever, kids screaming in the background. This gives you a quiet, controlled space where you can enjoy. And like I said, when people come in, it's like not only the oh wow effect, but boy, look what they're doing. It's a professional place, and they feel they're leaving with a professional product.
Fantastic. Well said. And Gary, I think that kind of brings us to a good stopping point. But where can folks find more information about Studio Podcast Suites?
Now, the best place to go, obviously, is to go to my website. All the information is on there, anything that you need. So it's studiopodcastsuites.com. And, my phone number I pick up, it's 904-544-2110. So, yeah, please call me anytime. Anything I can do to help anybody, please let me know.
Fantastic. You're a great dude, Gary. And Gary, feel free. I'll try to do it myself, but if you want to drop a link to the website in the chat, that'd be fantastic too.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, folks, we are on our last speaker for tonight. And this panel guest has actually been co-hosting tonight's meetup the whole time. She's on the panel today to talk about
my own bedroom.
Yeah. She's on the panel today to talk about marketing your podcast at companies, because thanks to her work on her creator-owned podcast, Digital Dispatch, she was afforded the opportunity to host a brand new podcast called Cyberly on the Freight Waves Media Network, which is a global a network in the logistics and freight marketing world. Let's re-welcome Blythe Brumleve to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
So Blythe, like I was saying, you're currently the host of two podcasts. One being a company sponsored show, Cyberly, and the other is your creator-owned podcast, Digital Dispatch. What are some significant differences between running a creator-owned podcast versus hosting one as part of a partnership or sponsorship? Is there any differences, key differences, whether it be in your process, responsibilities, or metrics?
I feel like there's definitely a period of readjustment. When you run your own podcast, you can kind of just go by your own schedule. I recorded usually every Sunday, but if I didn't record some Sundays, I would just, sort of rehash a previous episode and move on to the next week. With being on a platform, I feel like it's almost more challenging. And I almost feel like I've made it to like the big leagues in a way where now it's more eyeballs, even though it's more of a niche based audience when I'm talking to like, the B2B crowd, the logistics, the supply chain crowd. It's more, I'd say it's, a niche space, even though these are billion-dollar industries that affect damn near every part of our lives. But with those two key differences, I feel like I have to be more on point with the Freight Waves Cyberly show versus my own podcast, where I can have a guest on and I can kind of, freely talk about, whatever I want. When you work for a media platform, and even when you work for, say a radio station or a TV platform, maybe some of you have done some local TV. If you were to get a job at a local TV station, you wouldn't be allowed to do anything else with any other media company unless they're an official partner of that TV station. And that's sort of the freedom that you have with podcasting, is that you can have whoever the hell you want on. It's your show. You can do whatever you want. But with, I guess, those greater expectations, and with actually getting paid to do the show, which is fantastic. That was my ultimate goal with starting up my own podcast. And I've done some, different ways of like using the content that I'm already creating on that show to use it still on my own platforms, social media clips, best of clips from each Cyberly show, things like that. That have still helped keep my podcast going, because I definitely still want to keep that going. It's just, more work with 2 episodes every week instead of just 1.
So we got a question in the chat that I think is applicable right here. How much did your own podcast help you to have the confidence on doing a sponsored podcast?
I feel like that helped me a ton, because I already was that was my way. Because for folks who don't know, I come from a sports broadcasting background. So I've been in the broadcasting game for a little while, but I'm now hosting my own show. And so going from having co-hosts to feed off of, especially, when they're right beside you, is, I think, it definitely is a lot easier to be able to feed off of that energy, to be able to know who's going to ask the question next. And when it's just you, you're kind of just reliant on filling up that airtime. So, there's an hour of airtime that I have to hit my marks for everything. I have to, for the first 10 minutes of an hour-long show, it's just me not shooting from the hip, but I'm going off show notes of topics that I think are interesting, that I think the audience should be made aware of. And then, around the 20-minute mark, I'm bringing on a guest. Alban was actually, I think, my 3rd guest that I ever had on Cyberly. And it was an opportunity where that conversation was really good. And so normally I have people on for about 30 minutes, but with Alban, I had him on for 45 minutes. And so with that particular show, I'm cutting down what the hot topics I'm talking about, in the beginning part of the show and then towards the end. So there's a lot more to it when you're doing live broadcasting versus recording. And then you also kind of have to make sure that you're just on it, that you got to be able to hit your times. If the producer's in your ear telling you have 30 seconds left, you better be able to wrap up that last 30 seconds. Whereas podcasting, I just feel like, even though I had a video aspect to it, it just feels, I don't want to say easier, but it just feels like the conversation can flow naturally versus live when you're in a much more structured environment.
So I think it was Romina that might have posted this while Gary was talking, but something to the effect of, if you want to kind of, get into podcasting and monetize it, one strategy without having to get ads and sponsors is to become an authority in your field. And I think that's definitely something that you were able to accomplish with your digital dispatch. So I was curious as far as, did you seek out the sponsorship with FreightWaves, or did they go to you? And then what was the negotiation process like when you were working, with such a large company like FreightWaves to figure out the detail and the contract of getting Cyberly started?
There wasn't really much negotiation involved, because when they told me the number per show, which was significantly more than I made in sports radio, I damn near spit out my drink. So it was that kind of transition that I just said, yes, like, absolutely. I'm signing on the dotted line. So there's definitely a level of pay increase that you get from focusing on the niche. And I think that that's where, focusing on the Digital Dispatch podcast and the content that I published there, that led to an opportunity that I had a guest co-hosting role, free, and I did it for free for a month with FreightWaves. And I think that that was sort of my trial with them to see if it would work out. And then at the end of that trial, they still had, guest co-hosts lined up for that particular show. But then they approached me separately and said, we're trying to increase our live broadcasting. We're interested in giving you a 30 to an hour long show. And at first I said, okay, well, let me just start off with a 30-minute show. And then I said, no, I could easily talk for 2 hours by myself. Not easily, it would be a little bit of a struggle, but having a guest on and then also bringing up topics for a weekly show, I think that that's an hour is a really good time frame. And so going from that opportunity where it wasn't a paid opportunity, I was sort of just trying out for them, was very similar to how I got started in sports broadcasting. I had been doing, some writing. I was editor-in-chief over at Void Magazine, which is a local company maybe that you guys are aware of. And they were starting up a football show, and it was a football show hosted by all women. And so when I was approached about that show, I did that show free for 6 months, and until I got the opportunity to get paid. And so going from those different opportunities, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons, where you might have to get paid dirt level money. You might have to get paid no money in order to sort of show your stripes a little bit. And that was a decision that I made that was right for me. I know that there's a lot of people out there that will sort of talk about, sort of the internship market and how you shouldn't take it. You should always get paid for your internships. But an internship, as well as any other job opportunity that you take, you have to look at it as an investment. And I looked at it as an investment into the future of my career. Here I am I can talk on a podcast all I want to, but can I get elevated to that next level by using their platform in order to get my message out there further? So using that same strategy from sports into the logistics market worked out perfectly for me. And now, I'm getting paid to do what I love. I can still create content, and it's opening up the doors to other opportunities where I can now, help teach other people about, content marketing and the distribution of your show and how important that is. And all of these different tactics that I've learned over the years in B2B marketing, and I can help other creators in that same area. And even if you're not into logistics or, supply chain or, even B2B marketing, I feel like there's still some useful tips that I give out to the people, and it helps me with other monetization options as well.
Speaking about like doing, that quote unquote free work to earn your stripes, that definitely resonates with me, because prior to us landing our sponsors and things like that, we were doing, we were taking sponsorships that really didn't, we didn't make any money off of. We did it just to kind of build our own kind of, podcast resume. So we were doing, creating ads and commercials and bumps that we would play in our show to kind of like, to show our capabilities. We were more concerned about the opportunity rather than seeking out the monetary gain, because the monetary gain just wasn't that, it wasn't that much, but the opportunity was a lot more important. And then, of course, that led us to the opportunity of actually getting a pretty decently, paid sponsorship, because we had this history of working with, other brands, whether they be smaller ones or big ones, but we had something to show for it. Before we could ask for, a paycheck, we needed to, like you said, to kind of earn our stripes and show that, we're not rookies in this. So I'm glad you brought that up. And speaking about niches, we had a question coming to the chat from Allison Gray. She wants to know, how do you distinguish or separate yourself from your niche, if applicable?
I would say separating yourself from the niche. Well, in my opinion, you can always start small and then branch out. You can't start big and then go small. I learned that the hard way with my blog that I started in 2017. I started a sports and entertainment blog, and I thought that that was a niche, like foolishly. And, you know, years later, there's so many niches within niches of those, you know, sort of bigger platforms. But for me, it was a conscious decision of when I started, because I've been podcasting since 2014. And so when I I launched a separate podcast back in November for Digital Dispatch, it was almost like a clean slate where I said, okay, knowing all of this information and experience that I've had in the past, how can I use that to get my show off the ground in November? So I took my best of content that would fit that niche audience. I picked about 8 episodes. I edited them. I added a new intro. I added a new outro to each one of those episodes. And that's how I launched. I launched with 8 episodes that were sort of the best of content of all the shows that I've done in the past, but I only wanted to target the logistics and supply chain audience. And so I think that knowing that, I can start small in that realm. And then in the future, somewhere down the line, you know, maybe in a couple years or so, I can expand into sort of overall B2B marketing. That's sort of the goal for me. And I feel like, especially for a lot of businesses that are coming into, you know, the media landscape, they know that they need video content. They know that they need podcast content, but for them, it's very difficult to find that lightning in a bottle host. And so if I could give, you know, sort of any sort of recommendation to anyone out there, is that even if you're working on your hobby podcast, which is something that you're super passionate about, there's a lot of money to be made with a lot of these businesses that need the exact skills that you are building right now. They need hosts. They need people who know how to get a guest on for a show. They need somebody that knows how to distribute a show out to a platform, and they need it bad. There are so many companies out there that are looking for those exact same skill sets. And so sort of the path for me is to capitalize on those opportunities right now and in the future, and then use that to sort of build up still my business and my profile to get those additional income streams coming. Because I think if COVID taught us anything, is that one income stream is not safe. You need more than one. And as long as you can find sort of an ROI with those income streams, you know, with working on a podcast for free, that's not technically an income stream, but it led to an income stream. And so I think that knowing all of that, where you're choosing to invest your time and how those can eventually possibly turn into an income stream or a future investment, I think that that's where I would focus a lot of my creator energy.
Those are really good recommendations. And I wanted to add to that, you've shared a lot of advice for podcasters who are seeking, similar sponsorship or partnership opportunities. What's some advice or recommendations that you would give in regards to helping podcasters protect themselves from maybe like a legal or a creative property perspective?
Oh, what do you mean? Like a lawyer? We probably need to get Alban back on to talk about that, or because I don't know much about. I just kind of I try not to involve, like, say, other musical acts or music, because I know that would get us dinged immediately back in my radio broadcasting days. Is that if we played longer than 30 seconds of a song, then that was a violation. Also, YouTube live streaming, you cannot play any other type of copyrighted material unless it's a parody, which falls under a weird like parody rule. That's the only suggestions I think that I would have from like a legal perspective. Other than that, I think it's kind of free reign as long as you have an opinion, but don't take this as legal advice, because I don't know the exact routes in regards to that. All right.
Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Blythe, whether that be in the chat or maybe directly? You got anything?
I think
All right.
too. I
Well,
saw.
fantastic.
I
Blythe,
did
thank
want
you
to
so much.
comment on distribution because I saw somebody bring that up earlier. Distribution is everything for your show, and it's something that I typically struggle with. You know, once you would love to be able to create a show and then just be done with it and hit publish and have everybody find it and listen to all the things. But then the reality is that there's so much content out there. There's never been a greater demand for our attention. And so if you can find ways to take your long form content and split it up into digestible clips, put it up on TikTok, put it up on Instagram, put it up on Twitter, all of these different platforms, even YouTube, do that, because that is the way to drive that continuous attention, because everybody is spending their attention on their phones, in social media, and you have to be there. You have to be showing off your show consistently. And if you think that sharing one post about one episode is enough, it's not, because your average reach for any of your crowd that on any of these social platforms is usually around 10%, and that's being generous. If you share one clip, share it again in a couple days, or create multiple clips. I've done really well, especially on LinkedIn. I know LinkedIn is sort of maybe the redheaded stepchild when it comes to social media marketing, but as far as organic reach, it is a gold mine right now. If you are involved in any kind of business, marketing, or anything like that, get your show on LinkedIn, because they are looking for creators to upload even digestible small clips to their platform. So I would highly, highly recommend that to any folks that are out there. Just focus on distribution, because a lot of marketers will say you should spend 80% of your time on distribution and 20% of your time on actually creating the content itself.
Blythe, and we did get a question from the chat. This one's from Romina. She asked, I host 2 other podcasts, with 3 total, mine and 2 other ones I'm hired for. I often have an issue on changing the mindset of my podcast and other official podcasts. How do you switch gears to bring your best on both platforms?
Oh, I think this is kind of a tough one, because it really depends on the content of the episode. I think as long as you're prepared, because I empathize with you, Romina, because I'm doing 3 shows this week and I'm already having like tremendous anxiety from it. Now that we're kind of in the mix, I feel much better about it. But at the start of this week, thinking of doing 3 shows is a lot, because you have to manage that on top of your everyday life and on top of everything else you have going on. What I would suggest is start documenting your processes. If you have any part of your podcast that you can outsource that doesn't need you, and most of the time, as far as like a podcast is concerned, the creation of it and the actual like hosting duties of that show, you should absolutely be involved in. But I kind of get on Badr a little bit about this, because he's very anal about his editing of his podcast, and this is something that could free up a lot of his time. I understand it's an art for some people, and I definitely empathize with that. But if there are some parts of your shows, especially if you're producing a lot of it, you need to start taking some of that energy, writing those processes down, exactly what you do, so you can then start to offload that. Because if you are hosting at least 1 show a week, or even multiple shows, your energy should really be devoted to producing the best show possible. And then anything outside of that, even the distribution of your content, write those processes down, and write the editing processes down, the things you're looking for to get removed from your show, the little nuances that you want taken out. Teach someone else to do it for you, because then that will free up time, that'll free up that mental bandwidth, so you can really focus on delivering the best show possible. Because if you're not delivering the best show possible, then it's all for nothing anyways.
Very well said. I'm not sure you didn't add to bring me into that, but very well said.
But it's a real concern, because some people, it's very much a situation where you don't trust, and I go through it too, you don't trust somebody else to do as good of a job as you would do. But asking yourself as a true creator, and as you're growing, the only way you can grow is if you start to remove yourself from the things that you absolutely don't need to be a part of.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think I have been attempting to be a lot better with the editing, being a little more lax or lean on things that probably aren't applicable to the average everyday listener. I think there's a few folks on here that probably spend a good amount of time, maybe hours editing one podcast, maybe with the thought that they are listening as attentively as you do in editing. And a lot of times that's not the case. People don't mind a here or there, or maybe a stutter, or a little bit of silence. You know, a lot of times I think what I need to remind myself is that a lot of listeners are out and about. They're doing other things. You know, they're not listening so intently. So the progress I've made has been a big help as far as, you know, cutting down some time in my process, getting out our shows a little quicker, and still having a quality product, you know?
Yeah, there's definitely some stuff that you can offload from your plate, and you can train somebody else to help you find those nuances, because I don't know of a single instance that I've ever turned off a podcast because somebody said too many times. If it's a bad show, it's a bad show. Then I won't go back. But the people that would actually turn off a show, I think, is very, very fractionally low.
Yeah, I liked what Alban said earlier, you know, about the, you know, people, I think a majority of people listen to podcasts because of that, you know, that conversational tone, that human connection, hearing other humans converse about a topic I enjoy. Yeah, I'm not going to criticize you for, you know, saying or whatever it may be, or be going on a tangent. I think that's definitely something important to you know, always kind of have in the front of your head. But Blythe, thank you so much. Fantastic pieces of advice. I want to go ahead and Alban writes, if you're editing out every use Descript, which is a platform or a software I need to probably go look into for sure. I believe, and I'll go ahead and ask Alban to unmute if he wants to chime in. But Alban, what's Descript for anyone unfamiliar?
So all the editors in the room know, and especially people like Al Pete who've got a music background, all the editing software we're using is really designed for music. And we inherited it as podcasters. And so if you're using something like GarageBand or Audacity, that was made for musical instruments in many cases, or, you know, song. Well, Descript is basically Google Docs. What it does is, like, you record your audio, and then it's like a Google Doc where it's got it actually transcribes your audio, and then you edit the audio by editing the Google Doc. So you like delete a section and it's deleted. And then you move something and it moves the audio. And you can go in, and they've got this thing called, I think, filler word removal, where you just say, like, hey, what are all the filler words? So obviously, so, like, any of that stuff. Boom, you just start going through and it says, here's one, remove all, and you remove all of them. And so if you're the person who's doing this, like, editing, and you really want all this taken out, it can be a game changer for saving on your audio.
Yeah, I just linked. Warren said my life is a lie. I just linked the not only the website, but also the YouTube video that I remember Blythe showing me. I think when the company was first launching or making it public, it blew my mind seeing this commercial of people recording audio, reading it, cutting out certain words, and then that was the audio. It was insane.
I will say that I personally, I've personally tried it before, and I really liked it, but my podcast editor was he was a little elitist, and he said that it was too choppy. So he was able to then clean it up for me after using Descript. I imagine, but I got it like right when they first launched. So I imagine that maybe they've added some additional gaps in there in order to help it keep from being so choppy. But then it was probably also the way I speak, because I literally just said so I think it's probably more on us to stop saying so much and to have a clear thought before we actually speak.
Oh, it's so good. It helped me a ton. They've gotten a lot better. I know you're talking about it's choppy. The next level thing that they have is, if you upload audio of yourself talking, they will create like a mimic of your voice. So even a word that you did not say, you could type it and it will auto generate you saying that word.
Wow.
So if, like, you know, if I misspoke in the podcast and I say something dumb and I'm like, oh, I really wish I'd said Amazon, instead of saying Apple there, well, you just delete it and you type it out. And yeah, deep fake podcast time. So only let you do
We're all going to be out of business soon.
It's only if it's your own voice. So they have a way, like, you upload yourself reading their disclaimer, but it sounds good. It sounds really good. And it's kind of shocking and a little bit weird, but you can save yourself some editing time.
Yeah, no, that is I got to check that out.
Yeah, I think we did a video. If anybody wants, I think on the Buzzsprout YouTube channel, we've got a Descript walkthrough where we just kind of try to teach the basics.
Yeah, please link that. That'd be great.
Awesome.
And since we are at 9 o'clock and pretty much at a good closing time, I will go ahead and do one last call for any last minute questions, topics, anything quick that we can quickly address. Feel free to either write it in the chat or let me know if you want to go off mute.
Hope you guys enjoy it. Would you guys want more of these kind of shows, or would you prefer more in person? I think that's kind of our next step, to take a lesson from Gary. We're going to talk about the next show. And I feel like we could probably do a combination of both.
Yeah, that'd be good to know. Yeah, if you guys enjoy, I think we were hesitant to do virtual last year because it seemed like every quarter we were hoping that the situation would get better, that we could meet up in person. And I think we also just wanted to avoid adding to virtual meeting fatigue, because I think everyone was just kind of tired of virtual meetings. But I think me and Blythe have discussed, if the Jax Podcasters group is up for an in-person meeting, maybe that's something we can talk about or look to do sometime in July or late third quarter. But we'd love to hear from you guys, which kind of brings me to my point, as far as if you haven't, if you're on Facebook and you'd like to join the official podcaster group, I will go ahead and link that in the chat once again. Like I said, that's where we kind of distribute all of our news, whether it be a meetup. You can also post questions, your latest episodes. We do a monthly episode thread. So feel free to join our Facebook group page as well. I want to go ahead and thank our panel guests as well as you guys for joining us. I'm glad to see that our first virtual meetup was a success. We had, like I said, a lot of new faces, a lot of familiar faces. And I want to go and, like I said, thank Alban and Gary and Blythe as well for being such good panelists and sharing really great information. And yeah, like I said, we're going to try to get back to a regular quarterly in-person meetup starting in July. Join the Facebook group page if you haven't already. And with that being said, I think it's good time to go ahead and bid you adieu. Blythe, you got anything to say? Any closing remarks?
No, I just dropped in the chat that we have a list, a Google spreadsheet of everyone's podcast. If you're new here, we'll actually throw that link up on Facebook. We can probably throw it up tomorrow, and anybody who's new can throw their show info into that spreadsheet. It's sort of like a mass list directory of every podcaster that's in Jacksonville. And so if you maybe have met somebody, here tonight and you want to hear more of their work, it'll actually be listed in that Google spreadsheet. It's been a while since we've updated that document, so we'll do another refresher, perhaps tomorrow, where everybody can add in maybe their updated podcast if you have a new one, like myself, so we can add that information in and share it with everybody.
And Robert asked a good question. Will this be edited, or will we be posting raw footage from tonight on the group page? I think we'll probably just edit it just to get the main panel discussion. And of course, what type of podcast or meetup group would we be if we didn't release it as a podcast in audio form? So we should have both video and audio offering. We'll post that in the, like I said, the Facebook group page. If some of you aren't on the Facebook page, I think we'll be able to email everyone via Eventbrite to that link.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, once again, thank you guys so much for joining. You guys have a great rest of your evening. Be well, take care, and until next time we meet.
Thanks, guys. Have a
Bye,
good
everyone.
one.